Hey everybody, how you doing? Hope everybody's doing well. Today we're going to start our new project, and that project is going to be a landscape. So what is a landscape? Well, a landscape is any kind of artwork. It can be a drawing, a painting, a photograph. You could even call a video of what we're talking about a landscape. But it's any kind of artwork that has to do almost 100% with nature, with the outdoors, with things that we find in nature. Forests, trees, mountains, things like that. We usually don't see many people or things made by people in a landscape. The main focus, the main subject is nature. Now, if I was to draw a picture of just one tree by itself, that would just be a picture of a tree. But if I draw a picture of a whole forest, that's when it becomes a landscape. A landscape is a big, wide view of nature. When I think about landscapes, when I think about landscape paintings and landscape art, the first thing that comes to my mind is Bob Ross. Bob Ross painted a ton of landscapes. He painted 30,000 landscapes, they say, in his lifetime. That's what I did when I was little. I used to sit around and watch Bob Ross paint all day. Not sure if that's why I'm an art teacher, but it probably didn't hurt. Bob Ross wasn't the only person to make landscapes, though. These have been around for a very long time. People have found landscape paintings in China that are as old as the 4th century, which is like the year 300, so a very, very long time ago. They were making them in China for a long time before anybody in the West started making them. They start showing up in Europe around the 16th century. So the year 1500 or so is when people in Renaissance Europe started painting landscapes. One of the important things about landscapes, which is kind of why we're doing it, is you want to try and capture a realistic view of the outdoors. Now that doesn't mean our pictures that we make today need to look like you walked outside with your phone and took a picture, but we want some elements, some things about it to be realistic. One of the best ways that you can show that realism in a landscape is to think about space. Now when I say space, I don't mean like space, like outer space. I mean space, like the space around you. Like the space in a room, the space in a field, the space in a forest. And in artwork, when we're trying to show that space, usually the way we do that is by showing depth. So when I say depth, I mean how deep something is. When you go to the swimming pool and you look down and it says depth 3 feet, that means the water is 3 feet deep. And there's a lot of different ways that we can show depth in our artwork. We do that by using something called proportion. Proportion is one of the ways that we show depth. All proportion is how big something is compared to something else. So if I have 2 trees and I want one of them to look really close and one of them to look like it's really far away, then one of them is going to be big and one of them is going to be small. Now that works because that's how we see, that's how our eyes work. If something's far away from us, then it's going to look smaller than something that's real close. So that's a real easy trick that we can do in our artwork to make that depth, that space, seem more real. Proportion is big. Another thing that we can do that's real easy is overlapping. Remember, overlapping is when one thing covers up part of or most of or all of something else. We say this hand is overlapping this hand. And again, that's just how we see. We're not Superman, we don't have X-ray vision, so we can't see through things. So if something is solid, we can't see through it. Now, a window is solid. We can see through that. But when we're talking about things from nature, when we're talking about a tree, if a tree's right here and there's a tiny flower behind it, you're probably not going to be able to see all of, or maybe even any of that flower. All right, so those are kind of some of the main things we're going to talk about while we're making our landscapes. Now it's time to kind of draw some stuff. You don't need to worry about starting just yet. We're going to talk about a few more things, but I wanted to draw some ideas, draw some examples with you to help you kind of come up with what your plan is going to be for your landscape. All right, so let's get started with that. All right, so for our landscapes, we're going to need some paper. We're going to need a pencil. If you've got a marker that you can use to trace your drawing before you color it, that would be awesome, but we don't really need one. We are going to need something to color with, so some crayons, markers, colored pencils, really whatever you have, whatever you want to use. So let's talk about our landscapes. I am going to draw some mountains. That's going to be where my landscape is. Now, just because I'm making mountains does not at all mean you need to make mountains. Your landscape can be any wide view of the outdoors like we talked about. So if you want to do a forest, a desert, just hills, a farm, something like that, all those are good ideas. Those all count as landscapes. So it can be any place you want as long as it's a wide view of the outdoors. And remember, the main focus is nature, so we don't really want to see like a ton of people. We don't want to see a ton of houses or buildings, things like that. Now, one or two, not really a problem, but we just don't want to see like a whole city. So your first step is going to be to draw some of your basic shapes, get your basic ideas on your paper using a pencil. I'm going to use a marker for that step just because it's easier for you guys to see. So when we think about our landscapes, one of the things we talked about was depth. And we said one of the easy ways to do that is overlapping. So I'm going to be thinking about overlapping during this first part. Now for my second part, when I start adding more details, then I'm going to start thinking about proportion like we talked about. So I'm going to start kind of up near the front. Now if this was a picture that I was taking, this would be where I was standing. This area in our paper is called the foreground. So I'm going to start, let's say, just with, maybe I eventually want a river to kind of come down here. So actually, the first thing I'm going to do is draw that river, kind of winding through some hills and going down off my page. Now, if something's far away, it looks small. And as it gets closer to us, it's going to look bigger, like that. So also in my foreground, I'm going to add, let's just say, not like a real flat area, maybe some bumpy kind of hills. All right, so that's kind of all for my like basic shapes that I need to do. All the details and stuff I can do in a minute. So the next area, not the farthest away, but the next area, that's called the middle ground. So for my middle ground, I'm going to do some more hills. And I want these to look maybe a little more serious. We're not all the way up to like mountains or anything just yet, but we're getting there. Alright, so I've got some hills, I've got my little grassy field area down here. Now in the background, since I want it to be the mountains, these are the ones that are going to look pretty big. So another thing to remember when we're thinking about nature is nothing's really all that smooth. Nothing's really perfectly straight. So as you can see, a lot of these lines that I made are kind of bumpy and shaky, and that's fine, and that's kind of what we want because it makes it look more real. So way off in my background, I'm going to have some big, giant, tall mountains. Like that. Alright, so I've got my background, my middle ground, my foreground. I've got a lot of good kind of basic shapes. Now it would be time to start filling in the details. If you look, you can see that I can't see all of this mountain, I can't see all of that mountain. That's an example of that overlapping that we talked about. So that's also helping with my depth and my space. I'm gonna add a few more of these hills back here to kind of cover up the front of my mountains. All right, so let's talk about proportion. If I want it to look like there's some trees around here, and I want it to look like this tree is real close to me, and the tree far away is, the tree over here is really far away, then I'll make that one small. So the closer something is, the taller I want it. Something's far away, I want it to be smaller. And maybe if I want something back here, I'm gonna want that to be real teeny tiny, because our eyes can only see so far. So if something's really close, we'll see a lot of good details. If something's in that middle ground, you know, kind of far away from us, we'll see less details, but we can still kind of make out the shapes. And then if something's real far away from us out in that background, we're not gonna see many details at all. All right, so that's kind of the basic idea. We want to think about our foreground, our middle ground, and our background. We want to think about proportion. We want to think about overlapping. Other than that, it's all up to you. You can come up with whatever kind of environment you want for your landscape. So after you draw it, if you have a marker, go ahead and trace your lines, and then it'll be time to color. And as we learned in that first video, Impressionist painters loved painting landscapes because it helped them really start to understand light and how light affects things, how sunlight affects things. And one of the ways that they did that was to use a lot of bright colors. So now I'm not gonna waste your time having you watch me color this whole thing in, but that would be my next step. And before I am finished, I will probably show you an all the way finished example just so you kind of know what it would look like when it's all the way done. But for now, start thinking about what you want, and I'll show you that finished example, and then you can get started on your own. After you're done, after you've taken as much time, hours, days, whatever you need to get it finished, click the link down in the bottom of this page that says Show Mr. Holiday my artwork, or show my artwork to Mr. Holiday, something like that, and take a picture of it and on that Flipgrid site that we talked about, and it will send it to me. Can't wait to see it. Here's that last example. All right, have fun making these landscapes. See you guys, bye.